Hello and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia. I am the publisher of Seeking Rents, which is a newsletter in Florida about state politics, but with a particular focus on the ways that big businesses and other special interests influence public policy in this state. That name, Seeking Rents, comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence, like a big business or a billionaire, uses their wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor, in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. Okay, so we are starting the final week of the Florida Legislature's 2026 legislative session. Actually, the final week of the regular session. They have, because of continued sort of infighting between Republican leaders in the House, Senate, and with Governor Ron DeSantis, they are, for the second year in a row, not going to get a budget done, which means they're going to have to extend this year's session or come back for a budget special session later this year. The state of Florida's fiscal year starts July 1st, so they need to get a budget in place by then, but they've obviously got some time to work with. That said, this will still be an incredibly frenzied week in the Florida Capitol, as a whole lot of bills will live and die this week. And I wanted to focus today real quickly on some big development showdowns that are about to go down on the floor of both the Florida Senate and the Florida House this week. These involve a couple of bills. One, we have talked a lot about, the so-called Blue Ribbon Projects bill. This is the bill number to watch here. The most important one is Senate Bill 354. This is a bill that, as we've reported, is being pushed by lobbyists for a giant landowner, a New York investment firm that has amassed more than 80,000 acres of rural land across North Florida, a lot of it around Jacksonville and St. Augustine and then Panama City in the Panhandle. And it is pushing this legislation, Senate Bill 354, that would essentially make it far easier to develop all that land. What this bill would do is essentially allow giant landowners like this New York investment firm to drop city-sized developments on giant tracts of land, 15,000 acres and up, without any meaningful input or approval from residents who live in the area where these projects would be built or their locally elected officials. It essentially takes local governments out of that pivotal development approval process. So that's the Blue Ribbon Projects bill. This has been sort of slowly moving through the legislature all session, in part because this New York investment firm has hired close to 20 lobbyists in Tallahassee to work it. And there was an enormously pivotal moment in the Florida Senate last week where this bill made it to the floor of the Senate and was this close to passing, but the supporters of it had to pull it at the last minute because it became clear there was just enough bipartisan opposition to kill it. There was, by my count, at least 8 Republican senators in the Florida Senate where Republicans have, I believe, 28 of the 40 seats. There were at least 8 of them that were willing to vote against this Blue Ribbon Projects bill as of last week. And so the bill was shelved without a vote. The supporters made sure to ditch out on the vote before letting it get voted down. That said, this is not over. One of the things we learned at the very end of last week, so going into this week, is that the supporters of the Blue Ribbon Projects bill are working on a potential amendment where they're going to try and pick off one or two probably of those Republican votes. There's also a key NPA vote in the Florida Senate. They're going to try and pick off one or two of those votes and get this thing across the finish line before Friday. So at any moment this week in the Florida Senate, we could see another showdown over the Blue Ribbon Projects bill. And the next vote, the next vote will be the key one at that point. If they can get through the Florida Senate, there is no reason to think they can't get through the Florida House, where the Republican supermajority in Tallahassee has far bigger margins to work with in the Florida House than they do in the Senate. And you might be asking yourself, why on earth would they even be considering doing something like this, where you're taking essentially local control away from these mega developments? And the reason, of course, is money. The other thing we've reported on Seeking Rents is that the landowner behind this legislation has donated at least $300,000 to key figures in Tallahassee. That includes $50,000 to a committee controlled by a guy by the name of Jim Boyd. He is the incoming Senate president. He's a Republican from Bradenton. That makes him the most powerful guy in the Florida Senate right now. And we learned last week, one of the main guys pushing this bill inside the Senate Republican caucus. Jim Boyd wants this to pass, and he's got the juice to potentially do it. So that is arguably the single biggest issue that will be decided this week in Florida, although there's obviously lots of important issues before the Florida legislature. But it is not the only big development showdown we're going to see this week. So later this week, the Florida Senate will take up another development bill. This could be in one of two. There are two bills. They could take up either one. One is Senate Bill 208. The other is House Bill 399. And these bills, they're sort of like Christmas trees for developers. They've got all sorts of different ornaments on them for different special interests. So, for instance, one provision in House Bill 399 would eliminate all local government rules that require a supermajority vote of the local county commission to approve a development. They call these comp plan amendments. And one of the stronger protections you see for like rural land, we see this in places around Orlando and in places around Miami, that one of the ways you protect rural land is when a developer comes looking for permission to develop a piece of rural land, instead of getting permission from winning a majority of the vote on the county commission, these counties have provisions in their like county charters, which is kind of like the local constitution, that say, no, you got to get a supermajority of the county commission. So it's important protection. House Bill 399 would just wipe those out entirely. For instance, in Orange County, which is where the city of Orlando is, voters a couple of years ago passed a charter amendment by more than 70% of the vote requiring a supermajority vote to amend the comp plan on rural land. That would be completely absolved. Another provision added late in the process to House Bill 399 is for the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, this historic Art Deco hotel, famous. It wants to develop a water park on its property that has faced intense local opposition. There was a language put in at the last committee stop in the Florida House that would essentially allow the hotel owners, the billionaire owners of this hotel, to basically steamroll local opposition and force the city of Miami Beach to approve this water park at the Fontainebleau. So that's all in the House bill. The Senate bill, developers in Orlando have already made it clear that they are going to run a provision at the Senate on the Senate floor at Senate Bill 208 or House Bill 399, if that's the bill the Senate ends up choosing to pick up. They're going to run an amendment on the floor of the Senate trying to just completely eradicate what are known as rural boundaries in Orlando. The two of the biggest counties in Orlando are Orange County and Seminole County, and both of them have what are known as rural boundaries. And these are essentially, you can think of them as like urban development lines where anything beyond that has extra protections. It's supposed to be harder to develop. And you're trying to do two things with the rural boundary. You're trying to force more denser development in your urban areas where it is more efficient, where you can start to build critical mass for things like public transit. And you're trying to preserve rural areas and slow suburban sprawl. So that's what rural boundaries are designed to do. There is going to be an amendment fight on the floor of the Florida Senate over essentially eviscerating the rural boundaries in both Orange and Seminole counties. And that could come as early as Wednesday of the final week of session. These bills, that is not all that these bills have. Like I said, these really are like Christmas trees for developers. There are also provisions in here that would stop local governments from make it harder for local governments to deny residential developments on the basis of compatibility, meaning they could no longer deny a proposed apartment building. Or not that they could no longer, but it would be more challenging for them to deny like a proposed apartment complex next to a single-family home subdivision. There's another provision authorizing manufactured homes anywhere site-built homes are allowed, and yet another provision ordering a study to eliminate what is known as the urban development boundary in Miami-Dade County. That's an enormously fraught local issue in Florida's largest county. This bill would essentially set in motion the eventual elimination of that boundary as well. Not even all of these things are bad. I actually think that compatibility stuff is pretty good. The manufactured home stuff makes sense to me, but some of these others are just clearly favors for deep-pocketed donors that are trying to get around the will of local voters in communities where they've realized it is a lot easier to buy the Florida legislature than it is to win fights before local elected officials who are more directly accountable to their voters. And why these bills are so important is you can be almost certain these won't be the only potential amendments we see on the floor this week. These are, the thing about a Christmas tree is you keep hanging more ornaments on it, right? So House Bill 399 and Senate Bill 208, those are two very important bills to watch this week because there could be any number of shenanigans that show up over the next, 5 days or so. The one last thing I'll mention in the development front, we have talked a lot on this podcast before about Senate Bill 180. This was a piece of legislation passed last year that was ostensibly supposed to be about hurricane recovery. It was the supporters, including Governor Ron DeSantis, when he signed it into law, said the goal of this legislation was to make sure like a homeowner whose home was damaged in a hurricane could rebuild without laws being changed in a way that makes it impossible or too expensive for them to rebuild in that area. This was people have even called it the Hurricane Relief Act. That legislation has been weaponized by developers across the state, some of the biggest, most politically influential developers, and by the DeSantis administration to just absolutely gut all sorts of like environmental laws, smart growth laws. So like, for instance, in Manatee County, where the city of Bradenton is, kind of near Sarasota on the southwest coast of Florida, south of Tampa Bay, developers have used Senate Bill 180 to prevent the county commission from passing new protections for wetlands meant to stop developers from destroying wetlands. In Orlando, they're trying to use Senate Bill 180 to kill that rural boundary we just talked about. The supporters of this legislation have all claimed up and down since all this stuff started happening that this was not their intention, that this really was supposed to be about hurricane recovery, and that they have vowed to sort of fix the mess they created here. And the Florida Senate, to its credit, has passed a piece of legislation to do so. That bill is called Senate Bill 840. There is another couple of bills in play, but 840 is the main one to sort of undo some of the damage caused by Senate Bill 180 and take away some of the abilities of developers to use it to just gut all sorts of environmental laws. The Florida House of Representatives has not heard that bill yet. The Florida House has been using procedural motions to duck any kind of vote on this. And so this is still not over. If this is the sort of issue you care about, it seems very likely at some point this week we will see some sort of showdown over Senate Bill 180 in the House. And this is another one. In all the other cases, as I mentioned, developers are on offense. This is a case where the development lobby is on defense. And as I said, the Senate has done the right thing here and has tried to pass this bill. The key will be whether or not the House is willing to take it up or whether they keep trying to sort of hide behind a rule book they frequently ignore when convenient, by the way, to duck a vote on this issue. So there you go. 3 big potential development showdowns this week in the Florida Legislature. Blue ribbon projects, that's Senate Bill 354, also House Bill 299 in the House, but Senate Bill 354 is the key one to watch. The developer Christmas tree bill, that's House Bill 399 and Senate Bill 208, and the fight over Senate Bill 180, the fight over fixing Senate Bill 180, and that is Senate Bill 840, and nothing yet in the House, but always time for an amendment somewhere along the way. Okay, we're going to leave it there. There's a lot that's going to happen this week. We'll make sure to keep you updated on the newsletter. Please make sure to click like and subscribe, leave a show rating or review, and if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. Easiest place to find us is at seekingrentsfl.com. That'll have all our stories and podcasts emailed straight to you, where you'll have real-time updates as we go through this week. And as always, subscriptions are free. Nothing we produce is behind a paywall, but there is an option to voluntarily pay for a subscription if you've got the means. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.